James the Red Engine by the Reverend W. Awdry. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. James and the Top Hat. James is a unique engine who lived at the station at the end of the line. He has 2 small wheels in front and 6 driving wheels behind. They are not as big as Gordon's, but they're not as small as Thomas's either. Sir Topham Hatt told James, "You're a special mixed traffic engine, James. You'll be able to pull coaches and freight cars quite easily." But freight cars are not easy to manage, and James understood this well. He could still remember his first day pulling them, where they pushed James down a hill and into a field. He had been rather ill after the accident, but now he had new brakes and a shining coat of red paint. Sir Topham Hatt had been quite kind to James. "The red paint will help cheer you up after your accident. You can pull coaches today, and Edward can help you out." So James and Edward went off together to get the coaches. Edward knew all about coaches and freight cars. "Be careful with the coaches, James. They do not like getting bumped. Cars are silly and noisy. They need to be bumped and taught to behave, but coaches will get cross and pay you out." They took the coaches to the platform, and both engines were coupled up in front. Sir Topham Hatt, the station master, and some little boys all came to admire James's shining rods and red paint. James was very pleased. "I am a really splendid engine," he said. "I'm so excited I feel like I need to let off steam." He did, too. Sir Topham Hatt, the station master, and the conductor all jumped, and a shower of water fell all on Sir Topham Hatt's new top hat. Then the whistle blew, and James thought they'd better go. So they went. "Go on, Edward," urged James. "Go on." Don't push, James," said Edward. He didn't like starting off so quickly. Neither did the coaches. "Don't go so fast! Don't go so fast!" But James didn't listen. He just wanted to run away before Sir Topham Hatt could call him back. He didn't even want to stop at the first station, and Edward had to tell him to stop at once. Even so, 2 coaches up front were beyond the platform before they stopped, and they had to go back to let the passengers out. Lots of people came to look at James, but as no one seemed to know about Sir Topham Hatt's top hat, James felt happier. Presently they came to the junction where Thomas was waiting with his 2 coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas was pleased to see James. "Hello, James. Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you." "That's right." Then a whistle sounded. "Oh, that's my conductor's whistle. I must be off. Sorry I can't stop. I don't know what Sir Topham Hatt would do without me running this branch line. Toodaloo!" And off he went with his coaches into a tunnel. Edward and James pulled away from the junction. They passed the field where James had had his accident. The fence was mended and the cows back in. James whistled at them, but they paid no attention. On went James and Edward. Through Edward's station yard they went, and they started to climb Gordon's Hill. "It's ever so steep! It's ever so steep!" he said to Edward. I've done it before, puffed Edward in front. "It's steep, but we'll do it!" "It's steep, but we'll do it." And the 2 engines puffed together as they pulled the train up the long hill. They both rested at the next station. When Edward had told James the story of how he had helped Gordon get up the hill, James laughed so much that he got hiccups. He made so much noise that he frightened an old lady in a black bonnet, and she dropped all her parcels. 3 porters, the station master, and the conductor had to run off after her, picking them up. James was quieter in the shed that night. He had enjoyed his day, but he was a little afraid of what Sir Topham Hatt would say about his new top hat. James and the Bootlace. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt spoke severely to James. If you can't behave, I shall take away your red coat and have you painted blue." James didn't like that idea at all, and he was very rough with the coaches as he brought them to the platform. Come along, he fussed. "All a good time, grumbled the coaches. "Stop grumbling and come on!" And James snorted into the station with the coaches grumbling behind him. James was cross that morning. "Gordon never fetches his own coaches, and he's only painted blue. And a splendid red engine like me shouldn't have to fetch his own coaches." James puffed and snorted to the front of his train and backed down onto it with a very rude bump. "Ouch!" went the coaches. "That was too bad!" And no one even dared to come near James. James began to feel very lonely. "I'll show them," he thought. "They think Gordon is the only one who can pull coaches." The conductor blew his whistle, and James started off with a tremendous jerk. Come along, he puffed. And off he went with the coaches, squeaking and groaning. They clattered over the points and onto the open line. Hurry, said James. The coaches didn't like this one bit. You're going too fast, they protested. And indeed, the coaches were going so fast that they swayed from side to side. James just laughed and tried to go faster, but the coaches wouldn't let him. We're going to stop, they said at last. And so they stopped. James was very worried. What's the matter? He asked his driver. What's the matter? Ha! You might as well ask. The brakes are hard on. A leak in the pipe, most likely. You've banged the coaches enough to make a leak in anything. The conductor and driver then got down and looked at the brake pipes along the train. At last they found a hole where the rough treatment had made a joint work loose. The conductor said, Well, how shall we mend it? James's driver thought for a moment. We'll do it with newspaper and a leather bootlace. Well, where's the bootlace coming from? We haven't got one. We'll ask the passengers. The conductor made everyone come out of their coaches. Has anybody got a leather bootlace, please? But no one had a bootlace, except for a very smartly dressed man in a bowler hat named Jeremiah Jobling, who tried to hide his feet. You have a leather bootlace there, sir, said the conductor to Jeremiah. Please give it to me. I won't. Then I'm afraid the train will just stop where it is. The passengers were furious. They told everyone what a bad railway it was. Then they told Jeremiah how bad he was instead. At last, Jeremiah gave them his laces. The driver tied a pad of newspapers tightly around the hole, and James started off again, pulling it very gently this time. He was now a sadder and wiser engine, and he took care never to bump coaches ever again. Foolish freight cars. As punishment for his treatment to the passengers and coaches, James was left alone in the shed for several days. He was feeling miserable. Oh dear! I wonder how long I shall have to stay in the shed. Will anyone ever see my red coat again? Why did I go so fast that it made a hole in one of my coaches that had to be mended with, of all things, a passenger's bootlace? And James began to cry. At last, Sir Topham had arrived. I know you are sorry, James, and I know, too, you want to be a really useful engine. You have definitely given me a lot of trouble. People are laughing at my railway, and I do not like that at all. I'm very sorry, sir. I will try hard to do my best, said James. That's a good engine. There's nothing better than determination. I want you to pull some freight cars for me. Thomas has agreed to help get them ready for you. James was delighted and puffed away to the station. When he arrived, Thomas was just finishing arranging the train. Here's your freight train, James, said Thomas. Have you got some bootlaces ready? And he ran off laughing to fetch his coaches. James took no notice, but backed down onto the freight cars. Oh, no! They screamed. We want a proper engine, not a red monster! James ignored the cars and started off as soon as the conductor was ready. Come along, he puffed. We won't, screamed the freight cars. But James didn't care, and he pulled the screeching cars sternly out of the station. The cars tried hard to pull him back, but James kept on. Sometimes their brakes would slip on, and sometimes their axles would get hot, and each time the trouble had to be put right. And each time James would start again, determined not to let them beat him. Give up! You can't, boss! You can't! Called the cars. I can and I will, huffed James, and slowly but surely he puffed along the line. At last they saw Gordon's Hill. Look out for trouble, James, said his driver. We'll go fast and pull them up before they know it. Don't let them stop you. So James went faster, and soon they were halfway up. I'm doing it, he panted. It was very hard work. Will the top never come? Then, with a sudden jerk, it all came easier, and James was at the top. I've done it! Hooray! It's easy now! But his driver shut off steam. They've done it again! We've left our tail behind! Look! Surely enough, this had happened. The last 10 cars and the brake van had slid backwards all the way down to the bottom of the hill. The coupling had snapped. But the conductor was very brave. Very carefully and tactfully, he stopped the cars and got out to warn other engines with his red flag in hand. So that's why it was easy, said James as he backed the other cars carefully down. What silly things freight cars are! There might have been an accident. Meanwhile, the conductor had stopped Edward, who was pulling 3 coaches. Shall I help you up the hill, James? He called. No, thank you, Edward. I'll pull them myself. Good. Don't let them beat you. So James got ready. Then with a beep, beep, he was off. I can do it, he puffed. He pulled and puffed as hard as he could. Beep, beep, you're doing well, whistled Edward as James slowly forged up the hill, with clouds of smoke and steam pouring from his funnel. I've done it, he panted, and he disappeared over the top. They reached the station safely. James was resting in the yard when Edward pulled up. Beep, beep, he whistled cheerfully. Then James saw Sir Topham Hatt walking across the rails towards him. Oh dear, what will he say? He asked himself sadly. But Sir Topham Hatt was smiling. I was in Edward's train and I saw everything. You've made the most troublesome freight train on the line behave. After that performance, you deserve to keep your fine red coat. James and the Express. Sometimes Gordon and Henry slept in James's shed. Although Sir Topham Hatt was beginning to think well of James, whenever a chance came up, the 2 engines would talk about nothing but bootlaces. Remember the time they had to use a bootlace to get you out of trouble, James? James tried to get his own and said, Yeah, well, remember the time when Gordon got stuck up on the hill? Or that time when Henry wouldn't come out of the tunnel? But it was no good. Gordon and Henry just kept on talking and laughing. You talk too much, little James, said Gordon. A fine, strong engine like me has something to talk about. I am the only engine who can pull the Express. When I'm not around, they need 2 engines. Think about that. I have pulled expresses for a very long time, and have never lost my way. I seem to know the right line by instinct. Now, every wise engine knows that's the signalman who controls the points to make sure that engines run on the right lines. But Gordon was so proud and boastful that he had forgotten. One morning he said, Wake up, James. It's nearly time for the Express. What are you going to be doing today? Odd jobs? Oh well, we've all got to start somewhere. Now be a good engine and fetch my coaches for me. Don't be late now. So James brought Gordon's coaches to the station, and Gordon backed down onto the train. He was showing off like anything. Make way there! Make way! Make way! Sir Topham Hatt was on board the train along with other important people. The conductor blew his whistle, and Gordon started off. "Look at me now! Look at me now!" he whistled. "Goodbye, little James. See you tomorrow." The coaches glided with Gordon out of the station. James watched the train disappear around the curve, and he could hear Gordon calling out, "Express coming through!" "Oh dear," he thought. "I wish I could pull the express." And then he went back to work. He brought some more coaches to the platform and was just being uncoupled when he heard a quiet, mournful puffing sound. And there was Gordon trying to sidle into the station without being noticed. "Oh, how embarrassing," he said to himself. But James noticed him immediately. "Hello, Gordon. Is it tomorrow already?" Gordon didn't answer. He just let off steam feebly. "Did you lose your way, Gordon?" "No, it was lost for me. I was switched off the main line and onto the loop. I had to go all around and back again." "Perhaps it was instinct," laughed James. Meanwhile, all the passengers had stormed the ticket office. "We want our money back," they complained. Everyone was making such a noise that Sir Topham Hatt had to stand on a porter's trolley and blew the conductor's whistle. "Enough, everyone! I promise you a new train if you will all keep quiet. Now then, Gordon can't pull the train, but perhaps James might. Will you help pull this train, James?" "Yes, sir," said James. "I'll try, sir." So James ran around to the front and was coupled to the train. Everyone got in once again. "Do your best, James," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I will, sir." The conductor blew his whistle, and off went James. Stations and bridges flashed by. Passengers leaned out of the windows and cheered James on. And soon they reached the terminus. Everyone said thank you to James, and Sir Topham Hatt was most impressed. "Well done, James. Would you like to pull the express sometimes?" James was excited. "Oh, yes, please, sir." The next day, when James came by, he saw Gordon pushing freight cars in the yard. "Hello, James," he said. "I like a little quiet work for a change. I'm teaching these freight cars some manners. I hear you did pretty good with those coaches. Good. We'll show them." And he gave his freight cars a bump. "Ow!" screamed the cars. James and Gordon are now good friends. James sometimes pulls the express to give Gordon a rest. Gordon never talks about bootlaces, and James doesn't talk about getting stuck on hills. And both are agreed on the subject of freight cars and what fun it is to bump them around in the yards.